how did Socrates, the ancient Greek philosopher, pronounce his own name? And what about other ancient historical figures like Caesar and Aristotle and Brutus? Conan O'Brien wants to know.
In the original ancient Greek pronunciation.
No one knows how the ancient Greeks pronounced that.
I know how it's pronounced.
But
Etymology.
Is it accurate? Do you read books to get this information? Do you go online? How do you get this information? Could you cite one of those?
Luke Ranieri, he's a gentleman on YouTube.
I think it's Ranieri.
Well, I'm here for you, Conan. I'm Luke Ranieri, or Ranieri, and this is polýMATHY. Socrates lived in 5th century BC Athens, and that means he used the classical Attic pronunciation of ancient Greek. And in that pronunciation, his name is pronounced Socrates. But this changes throughout time. That name was pronounced later during the Koine period, not as Socrates, but as Socrates. The vowels change a little bit. And then eventually it changes such that the pitch accent goes away and one of those vowel changes. It goes then to Socrates, which is the same pronunciation it has in modern Greek.
A Socrates. And
Socrates.
Would you say?
Socrates.
That's right, Jordan Schlansky. You know your stuff. And what about Caesar? Well, I've ranted about this before, but it is indeed Caesar in classical Latin and Caesar in the ecclesiastical Latin pronunciation. And also in that lovely German Slavic pronunciation of Latin, it's Caesar. So which one of these is right? Well, I think the conversation of the recent released episode of Conan O'Brien's podcast with Jordan Schlansky shows exactly this.
Luke Ranieri, he's a gentleman on YouTube.
I think it's Ranieri.
His name is Italian in origin, so it would be Ranieri.
Yeah, but then he moved to Jersey.
He has a great YouTube channel.
These gentlemen are both right. My name is Luke Ranieri, and in Italian it is Ranieri. And that means it's true. In classical Latin pronunciation, he is Caesar. In the Italian ecclesiastical pronunciation, he is Caesar.
Caesar. No one ever said Caesar! No one says Caesar instead of Caesar. Nobody.
When Italians are speaking Latin, they do indeed say Caesar.
No way!
And in English, we receive that name through French, through Middle English into Modern English, and we call him Caesar. And Caesar, Caesar, just as right as both Ranieri and Ranieri. Just as Socrates in modern Greek, Socrates in ancient Greek in the classical Attic pronunciation, and Socrates in English. But not Socrates.
Socrates.
But how can we possibly know the ancient pronunciation, I hear you complain? And that is you singular, because I'm talking directly to Conan O'Brien. Well, the answer, Conan, is simply books. Now, I know it's been a long time since you were in Harvard and you actually read books, but these books are incredible. If you want to learn a little bit about ancient pronunciation, here are a few places you can start. All of them are pretty good. You got the book Vox Graeca by Sidney Allen, and if you are a modern Greek speaker, there it is in modern Greek. You can get these things pretty easily. And if you want to learn about the pronunciation of Latin, oh look, that same guy who did one for Latin too. These are fantastic places to start, but if you want to get really into the deep stuff, we got this kind of stuff. This is where it gets deeper. And also, let's do another one for Greek. Ben Cantor's book, absolutely phenomenal. Gotta try that one out. Don't forget Sturtevant, of course, and Horrocks as well. Very important, very valuable texts. But the really interesting thing is these texts always give sources from ancient authors, actual Roman grammarians, Greek grammarians, who talk about the pronunciation of their own languages. And if I couldn't read them in the original, it might be a little bit more difficult to figure out exactly how these ancient languages sounded. So if you want to learn to be a fluent reader of Latin and ancient Greek, well, then you need to sign up for a course at the Ancient Language Institute. ALI is where we teach you how to become a fluent reader of Latin, ancient Greek, Old English, and Biblical Hebrew. And this is one of the most amazing things ever, because instead of using the traditional, though they're not exactly traditional, as I've talked about in a different video, the traditional methods of grammar and translation, we teach you how to read. Grammar and translation, hey, that's a valuable skill, but it is actually the total opposite of reading. We want you to be a fluent reader of Latin and ancient Greek and Old English and Biblical Hebrew. Well, how do you do that? Well, that's with the direct method. You are given texts that you can understand that start real simple. Some of them we write ourselves for you, along with all of the exercises and the workbooks and other materials. Here is an example of our new ancient Greek course.
Το μέλλον επί των άντρα πίπτε, το μεράκιον τόι αρώτροι των αγρών αρούι, τα πρόβατα agrios boai.
What a pleasant and familiar voice. That sounds like some pretty good classical Attic pronunciation there. Instead of trying to overburden you with complicated grammar rules, you get to learn the vocabulary and the usage and the language in context, with pictures, with sound, with your teacher guiding you all the way. From your very first class, you will be speaking in ancient Greek, in Latin, in Old English, in Biblical Hebrew, responding to your instructor and beginning to read these incredible languages. You'll be taking your first step on a path that will change your life really for the better. Since I started learning ancient languages, it completely changed my ability to access ancient literature of any period that these languages touch, from antiquity to the present day. I've never made a better decision in my life than to learn ancient Greek and Latin and to study Old English as well. Just the most incredible rewards are in these studies. You need to sign up though by December 14th if you want to start in one of the new cohorts for one of these languages for the spring term. And if you're not a beginner, we have intermediate and advanced courses in all 4 of those languages, as well as private tutoring available as well. I urge you, I implore you, I exhort you to sign up at ancientlanguage.com today. Now, yes, we have the books, we have the original grammarians, we have the commentaries from modern philologists, but we also have linguistic science, the way that languages work today. It's a bit like studying physics. We study physics, we can see how the natural world, chemistry, geology, how all these things work in the present day, and then we can use our telescopes or send probes throughout the solar system and understand how the solar system itself formed, how the Earth developed over millions of years. We can understand all of those things based on how things work today. So linguistic science combined with the actual testimony of the ancient Romans and the ancient Greeks, this is how we know how the languages were pronounced. And you don't have to believe me. The stack of books here, this is where you get started. This is the beginning of your reading. I know it's a lot, but if you don't want to see all of those, continue watching this video all the way to the end and then check out my extensive playlists on Latin and ancient Greek pronunciation here on this channel. And those videos have the references so you can learn more on your own.
Are we calling this the Conan and Jordan show? That's the official title?
Yeah, the Conan and Jordan show. Of course, I have to get top billing.
Don't worry about it, Jordan. Even though in showbiz, the main talent does get his name first, in the world of academia, to which you absolutely belong, at least in spirit, the head researcher, the senior author, his name goes last on the paper. But what about some other historical figures? Let's stay in the Greek world. How about another philosopher like Plato? Well, just like Jordan said in the podcast,
How do you say Plato? Please say it.
Plato.
Oh, you.
it is in fact Plato in Latin, and that is from the ancient Greek Platon. That final end, the Romans are like, that's too much work, I don't want to deal with that. So they got rid of it and it's just Plato in Latin, but it's Platon in ancient Greek. And it means broad, so maybe he was a broad-shouldered kind of guy, or maybe he had just a big flat forehead. Either way, very handsome guy. While Plato was a student of Socrates, or Platon, a student of Socrates, Aristotle was a student of Plato. Aristotle in the classical Greek pronunciation is Aristoteles, which means something like noble ends. But in modern Greek pronunciation, it's Aristotelis. Ancient Greek has pitch accent, which is such a cool thing. Other modern languages have pitch accent like Japanese, and the ancient Greek system is absolutely comparable. It's really cool. Where the accent is written, you have to go up and then you go down again. So Aristoteles, just like Socrates and Platon. But the guy who started it all, and by it all I mean all of Western literature, that's right, Homer.
The Homer.
Not that Homer, although words were given to his voice by Conan O'Brien when he was a writer for The Simpsons. Homer, in classical Attic pronunciation, is Homeros. Pitch accent on the ho, and then you have a nice long vowel that follows. Homeros, this beautiful sliding down. Homeros. just like that. But we don't get our ancient historical figures' names directly from ancient Greek, and certainly not from modern Greek. We get them via Middle English, via Old French, from Latin, from medieval Latin and classical Latin before it. So, what was Homeros? In classical Latin, it was Homerus. Homerus. And Homerus gets simplified into Homer, or something like that in, of course, a more modern French pronunciation. In any case, we simply call him Homer. The most famous name in literary history, and yes, half-hour animated sitcoms are an important part of literary history. And the name means, wait for it, hostage or prisoner. Why did he have that name? We don't even know if he really existed, but he exists in our hearts. Now to the Latin side of things, those good old ancient Romans. We already know how to pronounce Caesar or Caesar in the two pronunciations. Well, what about his good old buddy that stabbed him right in the back, Brutus? Well, that's in fact how his name is pronounced in both classical Latin and the ecclesiastical pronunciation.
Hey, Caesar just got stabbed by Brutus. I'm sorry, Brutus? What would you say?
Brutus.
Yeah, that's our guy. Go Jordan. Now, when it comes to other names like Cicero, you can bet that's not how it was pronounced in classical Latin, and not ecclesiastical Latin either. Ecclesiastical Latin pronunciation is generally pretty easy because it's a lot like Italian pronunciation, and a C-I in Italian is ci. So Cicero is how his name is pronounced in ecclesiastical Latin, but in classical Latin there is no ch. The letter C is only a k sound, and thus his name is Cicero, and it means a big chickpea. These names are fantastic. Now, who cut off Cicero's hands and nailed them to the Senate door and chopped off his head and put it on the rostrum where Cicero used to speak? Well, that was another great friend of all of these characters, which was Mark Antony. Marcus Antonius, and his name has that pronunciation in both classical and ecclesiastical Latin pronunciation. So why do we call him Mark Antony? Well, that's just a lovely simplification, anglicization, Englishification of his name. Mark Antony from Marcus Antonius. But those civil wars, they were rough. We need to calm those down, and the guy to do that was the adoptive son of Julius Caesar, of Julius Caesar, who was Octavian Octavianus. But when he became emperor, he ended up calling himself the August One, and we call him Augustus. Well, good old Gus didn't call himself that. In Latin, instead, it was Augustus, Augustus, and it has that pronunciation in both classical Latin as well as ecclesiastical Latin pronunciations. So let's not miss the forest for the trees.
There is unrest in the forest, there is trouble with the trees.
Proper names have different pronunciations in different languages due to the rich tapestry of historical tradition. Also check out the Conan O'Brien podcast, Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend, which just released the first episode of the Conan and Jordan show, which in fact they recorded back in December, but they released for free on the podcast now. It's a radio show on Sirius XM. Now it's freely available on their podcast. Definitely listen to it. Conan and Jordan just crack me up every time. Thanks so much. I hope you learned something. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below. Thanks again to the Ancient Language Institute for sponsoring this video, and especially to each and every one of my Patreon supporters. Eroste and Valete.
An origin, and so it would be Ranieri.
Yeah, but then he moved to
has,
Jersey.
New Jersey's very close, Conan. I can actually see New Jersey from my house. I am, in fact, from Pennsylvania. Hey, Conan, even though I'm not from Jersey, I gotta tell you, this Jordan fella, very clever. You should listen to this guy. Though he ain't a wise guy, that's something else. Don't worry about that. But how can we possibly know that? I hear you complain, and that is you singular because I'm talking directly to Conan O'Brien. Well, Conan, I know it's been a long time since you read a book, since